Masechet Sotah Daf Lamed. We're continuing our discussion of levels of impurity by noting that there are 5 different sages that all agree on the same principle. Amar Rav Aseh Amar Rav. Avamri La Amar Rabba ben Isi Amar Rav. 2 different tradings, both in the name of Rav, say. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yoseh, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Eliezer. Kulehu sevida lehu de'en sheni oseh shelishi beholin. These 5 sages all agree that a food that is sheni latum'ah, if it touches another piece of food, cannot make it shelishi l'tum'ah if it's chulin, regular food. As we saw before, Rishon can make sheni, that apply to all food. However, sheni can only touch, if it touches something else, can only make that food shelishi l'tumah if it's tirumah, and that shelishi can only make something else tameh if it's kodashim. Tirumah and kodashim are especially susceptible to tumah. However, chulin is not. Sheni is the last stop on the train for tum'ah, for chulin. It does not go to shelishi. Now let's see one by one the statements that prove that they agree to this principle. Rabbi Meir ditnan, kol ha'to'un bi'at ma'im divrei sofrim, metamet kodesh uposel et teruma. There are various things that require that one go to the mikveh midrabanan. In other words, on a doraita level, the person is tahor, but the rabbis add a fence and they say, listen, if you are in that category, then you have to go to the mikveh midrabanan. And therefore, before you go to the mikveh, then it's going to have a certain effect. What is that effect? They will make kodesh, sacrificial meat, mitameh. Mitameh means not only do they make it tameh, but it can touch something else that's tameh. In other words, we're treating this person like a sheni letumah, and such that if he touches kodashim, that'll make the kodashim tameh, and if that piece touches something else, it'll go to shilishi and to revi'i. And then poselet tirumah, and that person who has to go to the mikveh, again, is treated like a sheni. And if it's tirumah, if he touches it, it makes it tameh, but that only goes one level. See, the word metameh means it goes 2 levels. The word posel means that's the end of the line. He just makes the tirumah pasul, and that's it. However, umutar becholin b'maaser sheni dibre Rabbi Meir. But this person who midrabanan has to go to the mikveh, and we're treating him like a sheni, is allowed to eat cholin and maaser. What do we see from this? That although he has some level of tumah like a sheni, but touching cholin has no effect. Does not make the cholin into a shelishi. So here we see, according to Rabbi Meir, that a sheni does not make further tumah in cholin. That's the principle I just said. Chachamim mosrim b'maaser. Chachamim happen to say that it's prohibited for him to have maaser. But it's not clear if that means that he would make it tameh or not. If not, then he may very well actually agree with Rabbi Meir that it does not make anything further tameh. So there you go. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Now, Rabbi Yoseh hadamaran timite laite l'Rabbi bitruma b'chamishi b'kodesh. For Rabbi Yoseh, we can derive from that he agrees with this principle from the kal vachomer that he brought on the previous stuff. On the previous stuff, he brought mechusar kippurim. And they learned that Mechusar Kippurim, he can have tirumah, right? Because it's already sunset. He's just waiting to bring korban. He can have tirumah, but he cannot have kodashim. So compatible with tirumah, but not with kodashim. And then we compare that to kikar shelishi, which is no good as tirumah. If that's no good for tirumah, all the more so it should make kodashim tameh. So he uses kal vachomer by comparing these two to extend tumah one more level than before. Now, if he would say that sheni can make a shelishi tameh in chulin, well, then everything else would be pushed down. Because if sheni could make shelishi tameh as a chulin, then shelishi would be able to make revi'i tameh in tirumah, and then tirumah would be able to make kodashim chamishi, and we would learn that from that same kal vachomer, because you just push everything down, and the mechusar kippurim can have tirumah, but can have a kodashim, so that means he can have a 4th, but not a 5th. And so therefore something that itself is tameh as a 4th, all the more you should make something tameh a 5th. Right, so that kal vachomer works to extend something one level, and if you start at the top and say 2 can make 3 in cholin, then everything's going to go down. And nobody says that. Nobody says that kodashim could go down to a 5th. Therefore, it must be that Rabbi Yoseh thinks that for cholin, That stops at level 2, and that's why teruma can be level 3, and that's where we're going to derive the kal v'chomer. Oh, if it's tameh at level 3, then it will further make kodashim tameh at level 4. So Rabbi Yoshua says assumptions only work if he agrees with the above principle. In the next stage, Rabbi Yoshua titnan. Rabbi Eliezer omer ha'ochel ochel rishon, rishon, sheni, sheni, shelishi, shelishi. And we're talking about a person that eats food that's tameh. Now, on a technical level, food does not make human beings tameh. It goes the other. Humans can, if they touch food, they can. But on the D'oraita level, it does not. However, midrabanan, we want people to stay away from impure food, and so the rabbi said, anyone who eats food that is tameh at a rishon level, that person becomes tameh at a rishon level. If the food was tameh sheni level, he becomes sheni and shilishi level, and the person eats it, that person becomes tameh on the shilishi level. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. However, we're more interested in Rabbi Yoshua Omer, ha'ochel ochel rishon ve'ochel sheni sheni. He says whether you eat a food that is tameh rishon or sheni, you become sheni letumah. Shelishi, sheni bakodesh ve'en sheni bitruma. If a person eats shelishi letumah, then he becomes like a sheni regarding kodesh. It's such that the sheni for kodesh will make something he touches shelishi la kodesh, and that itself, if it touches something, will make it revi'i la kodesh. However, en sheni bitruma, it does not make him a sheni regarding teruma, so that something he touches will not cause tum'ah for teruma. All right, so that's Rabbi Yoshua is a little bit more lenient than Rabbi Eliezer. And now we're going to wonder, eating a shilishi letum'ah, how could he possibly eat a shilishi letum'ah? What becomes a shilishi letum'ah? Only teruma and kodashim. But teruma and kodashim, if they're tameh, cannot be eaten. So how could you ever have a case where one would eat something that is shilishi letum'ah? And we answer, implying the question in between here, we're talking about chulin, regular food, but sometimes there were certain people that were very stringent upon themselves, and that we eat chulin as if it were teruma. Many people who were not Kohanim, they wanted to act like Kohanim. In some ways, we do this even today, when we wash our hands in Tilat Yadayim before bread. Well, that's what Kohanim would do before they eat teruma, to make sure, as a stringency, to make sure their hands are clean. And so we do this at least when eating bread, to raise it to that level. In olden days, people would make a vow and have these special chaburot, and they would eat their chulin al taharat teruma. So in this case, technically, it's permitted because it's chulin. So even though it's shilishi la tum'ah, it's permitted because it's not actual teruma. And nevertheless, because they make a vow that they are going to eat all their chulin as if it's teruma, so it does receive a level of it can receive that level of tum'ah. So, what can we derive finally from Rabbi Yoshua's statement? Al tarat teruma in, al tarat kodesh lo. If he says it's going to be it's treated like teruma, then yes, it will get that third level of teruma. But if it's going to be in al tarat kodesh, he wants to eat it as if it were sacrificial meat, then that food would not receive that very high level of tum'ah, or that be very susceptible to tum'ah as kodesh. In other words, a person can treat his food like teruma, and it'll get third degree kodesh. He cannot treat it like as if it were kodashim, and then contract third and fourth degree tum'ah. Now, we conclude, Al makasavar en sheni oseh shilishi beholin. If it was just regular holin, then it would not contract third degree impurity. Only if he's treating it as if it's teruma, so then, because he's treating it on that level, it can. But otherwise, right, we see here that it will, if he eats rishon, rishon becomes a sheni, but the shilishi is only in a case where he ate teruma, ate chulin, as if it was kodesh. But if it was eating chulin not as kodesh, just as regular chulin, then it would not cause something else to be a shilishi. So we see that he agrees with this principle that sheni and chulin does not impart tum'ah to a shilishi of chulin. Okay, next stage. Rabbi Elazar de Tanya. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Shelashtan Shavin, Harishon Shabakodesh, Veshabacholin, Veshabateruma. So Rabbi Elazar says that all three sources of impurity will end up being the same. In other words, it doesn't matter if the food that is the source of tumah is kodesh or cholin or terumah. And what really all it depends on is the things that it touches, right? What's their status? So all three of these, metameh, shenayim, uposel echad bakodesh. If it touches food that's kodesh, then that will go three levels. So if the original food is rishon, then if it touches something, that will become a sheni. The thing that touches becomes a shilishi, and if it's kodesh, that will be the last stop posel. So metameh shnai means it will cause something to be tameh, that itself can cause something to be tameh. It does that for 2 stages, and then the third and last stage, it's already a shilishi, revi'i, and that's for kodesh. That's the last stop, right? So it goes rishon is the original food, sheni, shilishi are these two, and revi'i is for kodesh. And so if it's kodesh, it goes all these levels. Now, any of these sources of tumah, if it's terumah, metameh echad uposel echad bitrumah, in that case, it only goes 2 steps. The original food is a rishon. It makes something that it touches a sheni, and if it's terumah, then it will go one more step, un posel, which means that's the last step because it's terumah, that'll be shilishi. Uposel echad bechulin, but they only, if it's chulin food that is being touched, then that makes at that chulin tameh, and that's pasul. Pasul means the last stop. It's not metameh anything else. So you see very clearly here that regarding chulin cannot make other food, other chulin tameh. Alright, good. So that's a good proof. Now, next sage, Rabbi Eliezer Titnan. Rabbi Eliezer omer hala nitelet min hatehora al hateme'ah. You have 2 pieces of dough. One is tehora and one is teme'ah. And they both have to take challah. They're big pieces of dough and you want to take challah. Now, for the tehora one, that's no problem. You just take a challah from it. But for the teme'ah one, that is a problem because if you take challah from the teme'ah, and now this challah is teme'ah, the kohen can't eat it. So we want to know, is there a way to take some dough from the tahor dough and use that to separate challah for the tameh dough? So you can do it. How? Kesad shetel isod ha-tehora v'ha-teme'ah notel kedei challah meisa shelo hurma halata. So we put the 2 side by side, and we take a piece of dough that's the amount of challah for the tameh piece of dough. We take that from the tahor one, and before we took any challah from it. And you take and we also take a third piece, or second piece, which would be smaller than a kabesa, also from the tahor one, and we put it in the middle, so that you have the big tameh piece of dough that we want to take challah from. Then we take a piece of dough that's smaller than the kabesa. Piece of dough that's any food that's smaller than kabesa cannot impart tum'ah. And so if you put that in the middle there, and then just touching, and then you take a piece that is going to be challah, that the part that will eventually be designated as challah, and you put that on the other side of that piece that's smaller than the kabesa. Now you have a bridge, and you solve the problem. On the one hand, you have a continuous dough, because each one is touching each other. So when you have one continuous dough, then you can take challah from it. So you can't take challah from one piece of dough for another piece of dough that's not connected to it. But now this is all connected, so that's okay. And yet we're saving it from becoming tameh, because the tumah in the big piece it can make the small piece tameh, but that small piece is less than the kabesa, so it will not impart tumah to the piece of challah. So then it could just separate the challah, and the challah, even though it was connected, will be tahor. So this is a brilliant solution. Chachamim say you're not allowed to do this. Okay, now all that is Rabbi Eliezer. We have yet another braita. V'tanya kabesa. Rabbi Eliezer says, you know what? That middle piece of dough can even be a kabesa. Now, how could he say it's kabesa? Because a kabesa generally is susceptible to tum'ah and can impart tum'ah. The reason why it's okay is because we're talking about chulin, and if that original piece was a rishon, and then the middle bridge is a sheni, well, sheni is the end of the line for chulin. Okay, so that's going to be his proof. The proof itself will have a couple of iterations. Let's see. Sabruha idi v'idi be'isa rishona v'cholin hatebulin l'chala lo kehala damu. Let's assume that everyone here agrees. Both Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer agree that the big piece of dough is tameh on the rishon level. And further, let's assume that they think that Holin, that's tevel, that you didn't take the chala from it, is la chala, la ke chala damu. It doesn't have the status of chala, which is holy. Chala can contract third degree, tum'ah, kind of like teruma. So let's assume that I didn't take chala yet, so still tebel, so therefore it's treated like chulin. If we have those two assumptions, then Maila b'hakam mipalgeh. Then what would be the basis of the machlok between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim? Demo sabar en sheni oseh shilishi b'cholin. Rabbi Eliezer must think that since this is all chulin, we treat this tevel like chulin, and this is a rishon. The rishon will go to the middle piece, even if it's kabesa, make it a sheni, and that's it. Sheni can now no longer impart tumah, and so that third piece that is connected to is tahor, and I designate that as teruma, and so that's perfectly fine. So that's a good proof for what we were looking for, our principle that we see throughout all these five sages. Whereas the sages, they disagree with this principle, and they think that the rishon of the chala will make the bridge, middle piece, sheni, and sheni, even though it's chulin, will make the last one a shilishi, and even though it's chulin, it can make shilishi la chulin, and that's why he says, no, I don't like this solution. Okay, good. So all that is a good possibility, and we're going to even go further and say, well, you can set up these assumptions in other ways and still get to a good conclusion. Maybe, in fact, everyone agrees that even Chachamim, right, we can bring them along and add them to this list, say that second cannot make third degree regarding chulin. V'hacha bechulin atebulin lechala kamipalge mor sabar kechala damu sabar la kechala damu. And the machloket actually is in the status of this chala. That's a rishon, but it's tebel, and so it has some chala mixed in. And so the Rabbanan thinks that it has the status of chala and therefore can receive shilishi letum'ah. And that's why it transfers from Rishon to the Sheni, the bridge, and the bridge can transfer to the Shilishi because it still has because it's mixed up with chala, has chala in it, so that's why it can transfer. Although if it was really just plain chulin, then it wouldn't be able to. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says that the mixture, the tebel, is treated like regular chulin, and chala does not get that higher status until you actually separate it, then it can become a shilishi. But right now, the mixture of tevel does not, so the rishon goes to sheni, and then sheni as the end of the line. So this is a good a good explanation, because here everyone agrees with the major principle. And now yet a third way of adjusting the assumptions going in. Maybe everybody agrees that this mixture of tebel that has chala yet to be taken out is not like chala, it's like regular chulin. And then let's say everyone also agrees with our basic major principle that we're proving all along, that a second cannot make a third degree in chulin. And so what are they arguing about? Whether you can purposely cause tum'ah to chulin in the land of Israel. Sometimes things become tameh by mistake. You can't help it, but should you go and do this on purpose? Rabbi Eliezer says, yes, it's permitted, right? Okay, it's chulin, it's not tzidumah or anything. There's still tameh people around it, so you can take the rishon, put the bridge, and then the bridge will become tameh. I know it's becoming tameh, but that's okay, right? And because then it won't transfer more to the third piece, and so this is a good solution. The third piece will be chala tehora. Whereas the sages said, you can't do this on purpose. You can't take chala des tameh and purposely go and bring some bread, some dough that is tahor, and touch it to it, causing it it's a rishon, and it will go and become a sheni, and you can't do that in Israel. Israel is a holy land, and we're trying to elevate the land and elevate the food as much as possible, and so you can't go and do this on purpose, and that's why they don't like this strategy. But otherwise, everyone agrees with this fundamental principle that sheni cannot make shilishi tameh when it comes to holin. All right, and that's it. That's the 5 different sages, and now we're done with the Tumah and Tahara section. Okay, we go on to the next part of the Mishnah that talked about the areas surrounding the Areh HaLeviim. One pasuk says there's a 1,000 migrash, another says a 2,000 migrash, and there was a machloket what these are for. Rabbi Akiva said that 1,000 is going to be for empty area and gardens, and 2,000 is for Techum Shabbat. Whereas Rabbi Yosef Gelili said, no, 1,000 is empty area and 2,000 is for fields. So what's the essence of the machloket? Mor Sabat Techumin Deoraita, Mor Sabat Rabbanan. Mor Sabat, that's Rabbi Akiva, he thinks that the laws of Techum are Deoraita. What's his proof? Right here. It says in the cities of the Leviim that there's 2,000 amot, and what is that for? That's as far as they can travel on Shabbat. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva everywhere in Shas and all over says that Techum Shabbat is a very, very serious thing. It's a deoraita law, and that has many stringencies that go along with it. Whereas the majority of the rabbis say, no, the law of Techumin, we agree with the law, but we say it's only the Rabbanan. And this 2,000 amot, that's talking about something else completely. That's just about fields. That belongs to the cities of the Leviim. They get to do things in their fields, but there's no source for Techum Shabbat from the Torah. Okay, so this source is a very important machloket. Okay, next, Tenor Banan. Bo bayom darash Rabbi Akiva b'shah she'alu Yisrael min hayam, natnu enehem lomar shira, v'chesad amru shira, kegadol hamakre et Hallel, v'hen onin acharav, Rashi Perakim. Moshe amar Ashir la Hashem, v'hen omrim Ashir la Hashem. Moshe amar ki ga'oga'a, v'hen omrim Ashir la Hashem. So now there's a machloket about how exactly, what was the choreography for the singing of Shirat Hayam. So on that same day that Rabbi Akiva made these many derashot, he also said that when Bnei Israel came up out of the sea, they wanted to sing a song. So how did they sing it? It was the same as when an adult Hazan reads the Hallel for the congregation. In those days, people didn't have Sidurim, so not everybody would know it by heart. And the Gadol, since he's a Gadol, he can recite it and have in mind to fulfill the obligation for the people hearing it. The people hearing it just have to have in mind that they are listening, and they'll answer certain parts. So the people don't have to say every word. Only the Gadol, who's the Chazan, since he's adult, he has to say every word. So how would that happen? So Rashi Perakim, if the opening person says Beset Yisrael, and everyone would say Beset Yisrael, right? Or that would be the case of Hallel. But if we apply it to Shirat Hayam, Moshe would say the first words Ashir la Hashem, and everybody would say Ashir la Hashem. You always repeat the first word of a paragraph or a section. Moshe would then say Ki ga'oga'a, and they would say Ashir la Hashem. So they would continue repeating Ashir la Hashem, and while Moshe said each next phrase. So say go aga'a, they would say Ashir la Hashem. Sus v'rocha babayam, Moshe would say, and they would answer Ashir la Hashem. So that's their repeating refrain. And Moshe is the only one that says all the rest of the words. And that's the same way they said Hallel. The Chazan would say Beset Yisrael, they would end up Beset Yisrael. Right? The Chazan would say Misraim, they would say Beset Yisrael and go through the whole thing. And the people didn't have to say every word because they're relying on the Chazan to say every word for them. And that would make it very beautiful that there was this call and response. That's the first opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer ben Osher Rabbi Yosef Galili Omer kekatan karet Hallel vehen omrim acharav kol ma shehu omer Moshe amar Ashir la Hashem vehem omrim Ashir la Hashem Moshe amar ki ga'oga'a vehen omrim ki ga'oga'a. So Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. The son of Rabbi Yosef Galili disagrees and says no, the choreography was similar to a minor chazan. Sometimes you have like Miami Boys Choir. You have kids who have a nice voice and they know how to lead the congregation, but because they're minors, they cannot fulfill the obligation for everyone. Therefore, all the adults have to say all the words. So, how would that work? Also a call and response, and then transferring it to Moshe. Moshe would say Ashir Hashem, and they repeat the same words, Ashir Hashem. Moshe says Nekru ki ga'oga'a, and they repeat ki ga'oga'a. Right? Moshe would say Sus v'rochebo, and they would say Sus v'rochebo. And that's how they did it with Hallel. Also, when the Chazan was a minor, he would say Beset Yisrael, they would say Beset Yisrael, right? Misraim. Ma'am lo'ez, and they would say Ma'am lo'ez, and so on. And so they repeat every word exactly. All right, that's second opinion. Rabbi Nechemia omer kesofer hapores al shema bebet knesset shu potech techila vehen omerim acharav. Rabbi Nechemia says no, like a sofer. He means actually a chazan. Chazan was also, maybe he was also a sofer. He knew the text well. And if he was the chazan, pores al shema, in Bet Knesset, he's leading the Shema. So this is how he would do. He would start off so that everybody knows when he's starting, and then everybody would repeat after him the initial word, and then continue and sing the whole thing in unison, right? So we say Shema Yisrael, and everybody would say Shema Yisrael, and then they would say the rest of it, and they would continue and recite it in unison, and that would be the same thing. Moshe would say Ashir el Hashem, and everybody would say all together Ashir el Hashem ki ga'oga asus v'rochebo rama bayam. All right, that's the three-way machloket. Now we ask, what's that the essence of their machloket? So when it says lemor, that Moshe sang the song to say, so the word to say is the part that's going to be repeated. So which part is repeated? According to Rabbi Akiva, it's the first word, right? That's why Rabbi Akiva says it's like someone saying, repeating the Rashi Perakim, that they say Ashir la Hashem, just the first word. Moshe goes on to the next phrase, and they say Ashir la Hashem again and again. So since the word lemor is going on the first word, that's the only words that the congregation said. Just the first two words, Ashir el Hashem, all the way for that entire section. He thinks that the word lemor is referring to every single word. Like the child who says a word, everybody repeats. And they say the next word, everybody repeats. So they end up saying every word after they heard it. But Nehemiah says, Vayomeru, says in plural, they all said it. That means they said it in unison, not as a call and response. And so what is Nehemiah going to do with the word lemor? Oh, lemor just means that Moshe started off, Ashir el Hashem, that he said alone, so that, to say, hey, everybody, we're starting. And after that, they all said it in unison. So they each explained the word lemor and in slightly different ways of what it's referring to, and get to these three different choreographies. We learned from this, by the way, the interesting ways that once upon a time they said Hallel, and Hallel was not just said by the Chazan, everybody was listening, nor was it all said just together, but rather there was a call and response. And there were different choreographies depending on whether the Chazan was an adult or a kid, and maybe other community styles. All right, and one more section of Agadah, since we're already talking about Shirat Hayam. Tenu Rabbanan, Darash Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, Be'sha'a she'alu Yisrael min Hayam, Natnu enehem lomar shira, V'chasad amru shira, Olam mutar al birkei imo, V'tinok yonek, משדי אמו, כיוון שראו את השכינה, עולה הגביה סברו ותינוק שמט הדד מפי ואמרו, זה אלי וענווהו, שנאמר, מפי עוללים ויונקים, ייסדת עוז. His choice, when the Jewish people came out of the sea, they said, we want to sing a song. And how did they recite it? Not just the adults, but even a baby in his mother's lap, an infant nursing. When they saw the divine presence, because Ze Eli, Ze is always something that you can point to and say, look at that. So even the little babies, even the nursing infants would turn their head, stop nursing, and say, this is my God, I will glorify him. What's the source of this Agadah? Pasuk in Mizmor Chet, right, from the mouths of babes. What does that mean? Out of the mouths of babes, Yisadet ha'oz, you found strength, right, the strength to recognize God's strength. And so even from the mouths of baby olelim, nursing children, so taking this quite literally, they even nursing babies suddenly miraculously were able to praise Hashem. And if that miracle is not enough, Rabbi says even fetuses in the womb were started singing Shirat Hayam. Shneimar b'makelot baruchu Elohim Adonai mimekor Yisrael. Right, in assemblies, bless God. Even those that are makor. Makor means from the source. What's the source of a person? Where they're born from? From the womb. They also sang a song, and maybe they felt like they were underwater too. And actually, this is quite interesting because Kiryat Yamsuf is a birthing imagery, right? You have a nation that is walking through, the waters part, the waters kind of break, right? And then they come out from between the broken waters. So it sounds like a water breaking and a baby coming out from within that liquid and now being born. So the nation is born in a very similar way. So perhaps these midrashim are picking up on that very important symbolism. Okay, Vaha lo hazu. Now we ask, but the fetuses, they can't see, and they have to. If you get to say ze eli vanvehu, you have to be able to point and say, here, this I see, my God, but they are covered up inside the womb by skin. And so, right, the problem isn't the miracle of them singing. The problem is that they can't see. So we can solve that. Amar Rabbi Tanchum kedem na'asa lahen ke'aspaklaria me'ira vera'u. That kedes na'asa lahem, that the stomach was transformed like an aspaklaria. Here's an aspaklaria, which means a lens or a mirror or a shiny crystal, and so became translucent. And the fetuses inside were able to see out, and they could see the great miracles and say Ze Eli Vanvehu, right? Which again is a perfect symbolism for this new nation that was incubated in the land of Egypt and now ready to be born. And so it's fitting that even nursing babies and even fetuses should join in singing to Hashem and thanking Him for the birth of the new nation. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.